Because I couldn't.
And until next time, keep it.
Do you want me to redo it? I'll redo it.
I'm getting hot.
Yeah, I know it's kind of hot in here.
Welcome back to the table. Today we're going to be trying something a little different because we're going to be doing 2 videos for this game, Bitoku. We have it set up in front of us, and this video is going to be kind of an overview or more of a what you do in Bitoku. And then we're going to have another video we hope you'll check out, which gives you our first impressions or thoughts on the game after just 1 or 2 plays.
Yeah, this game's a little bit of a big game, so it's definitely easier to kind of break it up like this so you guys can kind of watch it at your own pace. We definitely want to show you how this game is played, though, because it's so interesting. And we believe that by watching us talk about the game, you can kind of make up your own mind. But if you want to hear what we say, we do still appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be sure, this is not a thorough how to play. It is really just going to be an overview. We are going to talk about what you do on your turn, the places on the board that you can go, and a little bit about what they do, but we're not going to go through the absolute turn structure step by step by step.
Yeah, at its heart, this game is a worker placement game where you're using dice as workers, but there's so much more that's happening. You're also playing cards and you're managing a hand. You're also moving up a few different tracks, collecting a bunch of different resources to spend, and gathering certain tiles, building buildings. There's a lot you're doing here, but it's all kind of driven really by 3 basic actions.
Yeah, on your turn, you're going to be doing one of 3 different things, and hopefully in all, during a round, 9 things if you're lucky, but probably 7 of them.
We'll touch on that, but you can possibly take a total of 9 actions. You can play 3 cards, you can play 3 dice, and potentially you can move 3 dice across the river to take better actions.
Yeah, and you're going to be doing those things one at a time. Now, the interesting thing is, at the beginning of round 1, you only have 1 option on your turn, and that is to play one of these yokai cards. There's 3 spaces on your player board to play these yokai cards. You can pick any one of them in the first round, play the yokai card, and then take the effect of the yokai card. The yokai cards do a number of different things that are tied to different aspects of the game and on the game board, but the other main thing it's going to do is unlock the die associated with that space. Before you unlock a die, you can't place them out on the board. And of course, if you haven't placed them out on the board, you can't cross the river. So you start to see that layered approach to how you have to do things. However, that might change up through the course of the game.
Yeah, on future turns, it's possible that you will have earned income sources or things that might unlock your dice early, letting you jump straight into the worker placement game. But you're always going to be starting by playing those cards. And like what David said, it's going to go in player order. So when it gets back to you on your first turn, maybe you've played that yokai card and unlocked a die. You don't have to immediately place that die. You can decide to play another yokai card, unlock another die before you've ever placed. Now, there are pros and cons to both of these things. For one, playing 3 yokai cards in a row lets you gather up resources or take specific actions to try to set up for a better turn when you're placing your dice. But if you delay too long, somebody else might have already placed the die in a spot you want to go. And in any player count, there's a lot of blocking that happens because this game uses different board elements for a 2 through 4 player game, which is pretty unique.
Yeah, let's take a look at the board actually. We have this board set up here, even though there's 2 of us, we have this set up for a 3-player game, which is an entirely separate side of the board. On the other side, it's for 2 players, and this side has 3 players and these nice little spaces where you can actually flip this over for 4 players, giving you more spots to go to. And if I could show you all of them, I would. So many of these sections all over the board have one of these tiles that's removable. So it's amazingly variable depending on player count. But the key takeaway here is these spots that you're going to be placing the die are limited. In a 3-player game, there are 2 in each spot of the forest and 2 on either side across the river.
Right, and if those spots are taken, you have to sit and wait. Now, they might free up later, but because you can do these things in any order, and because, like I said, your income might unlock dice, you need to be always watching what other players are doing. As they take these actions, they're limiting what you can do. And you also can watch, because like I said, there's that action where you can cross the river. We'll talk about that in more depth, but that actually frees up spots. So timing in this game is very important. All of these tokens that you see down here, the fireflies, the spirits, the buildings, and the crystals, none of them refresh. So it's also kind of a race to grab those. If somebody takes the action that takes the one you want, you're going to have to find another thing to do on your turn.
Yeah, they will refresh at the end of the round, but in a 3 or 4 player game, there's just limited ones out here. If people grab those, you're going to be out of luck. Now, before we move on to the different spaces of the board where you're going to place your die, I do want to talk a little bit more about the player board because there's a fair amount going on here too. Not only are you going to be placing your yokai cards in these 3 spots, unlocking dice, but you're going to see all of these pilgrims. You have 3 that are face up that you can use for a variety of different things, but you have a lot that are face down, sort of sleeping, if you will. These are going to be spaces that you can open up by taking actions out on the board. Those crystals or some of these other tiles that Ryan spoke of, you're going to be able to take a lot of the crystals, and when you do, place them across the top of your board or potentially next to each yokai card, and it's going to wake up that pilgrim, score you some points, and that crystal is going to give you something at various points in the game. For instance, the crystals across the top, those will be given to you when you take that income that Ryan was talking about. And some of them can also be ongoing powers that just affect your game in general. And then the ones down next to the yokai cards are actually going to be triggered in future rounds when you play yokai cards in that spot. So you can start to see, you can build up a player board that allows you to chain together some combos where you're getting a lot more out of the actions that you take.
Right, and all that, of course, is based on those actual actions. And there are 4 kind of basic worker placement spots and then 1 special worker placement spot up here. But each one of these spots kind of works the same way. You're going to see a breakdown here with die numbers. You're going to start with 3, 2, and 1 on each one of your dice. And the strength of the pips is going to determine how powerful that action is. Now, there's a lot of ways to mitigate your dice. You're actually going to be collecting these amulets that can increase the value, and you can just spend these on your turn to make your dice a little better, because when you place there, you're going to get the version of that ability that matches the die pip. And you'll see here, some of them, if you just go with a 1, it doesn't really do anything, but it moves your Kodama 1 space. And this is just kind of a track that you go up. At the end of the game, whoever's the highest in each one of these Kodama tracks is going to score points. Again, these are variable, so each track is actually worth a different amount of points every time you play the game. But assuming that you've placed at least a 2 through 6, you're going to get some version of the action. Now, a lot of these are going to be a situation where you'll get 1 action or 2 actions. You might get to choose between one or the other, but then if you have a 6, you get to do both. Sometimes you're going to get discounts to that particular action. So going with a higher die is generally better, but you have to work up to those dice by spending those emblems. Now, each one of these actions down here kind of does its own specific thing, which we'll talk about. But in the middle, you can place to gain those amulets, some kind of bonus, and secure your place in turn order, because this space up here determines who will go first. It's important to note, though, if you take one of these 4 spots, you cannot cross the river to take another action. So you've now just taken your 9 possible actions down to 8.
Right, it gets a little tricky, and there's one other thing, actually 2 other important things I want to talk about with each of these spots before we talk about what they do. One is back to those pips. If Ryan placed a 4 there, if I want to go there to that same space, I have to place a die that's equal to or greater than his die as well. So not only am I driven by the power of the effect, but I have to beat or meet the dice that are already placed there. The other thing about all these spaces are there's these 4 spaces below each of them that have buildings. Throughout the game, buildings will be built there. We'll cover that in a second. But as the buildings are built, they also have dies with pips on them. When you go to this space, you're able to take the effect, and if you've met the die on one of the buildings, you can take the effect of the building. And the other cool thing there is if I built the building, if another player uses it, I get a little something too.
And that's another issue where the timing comes into play, because you might be waiting for somebody to build a particular building, or you might be waiting for somebody to move their die out of a spot, because if you don't have a 4, you need their die to move. Once that space is empty, assuming they moved across the river, you'll have free access to that spot. Now, these spots all do a variety of things, but they've kind of designed the board so that you just look below it and you'll see what matches. Now, the spot I was just talking about is going to allow you to collect dragonflies and spirits. Now, you're going to start the game with 1 dragonfly, but you have to earn spirits over the course of the game. And these are interesting because the spirits and the dragonflies you collect are going to combine. And it's only once they're combined that this is considered completed, and then you're going to get some of the benefits here on those dragonflies. They have to be paired with a spirit. This is an interesting way to get resources, to get more cards. There's a variety of different powers or actions that are going to be on these, and deciding when to combine them and trigger them is, again, part of the timing of the game.
Yeah, and another thing, during setup, each player is going to take a vision card. And doing a lot of these different things, including combining a dragonfly and a spirit, is some of the things that are on these vision cards. These are effectively objective cards that you want to complete by the end of the game. Now, like I said, everyone starts with one, but throughout the game you might acquire more and more of these and have them all face up next to you. So everyone else knows kind of what you're working toward, but you want to tick off these boxes to get them all done and score those points. If you don't, you're going to lose points. But it's just another reason why you're going to want to do things and complete things like what Ryan just mentioned.
Yeah. And the next action, if we're following along here, is the movement action. This is where you're going to move those pilgrims that David talked about. First of all, you have to have woken up pilgrims. If you've already got your 3 starting pilgrims out on the board somewhere, you have to wait until you wake up more pilgrims. But these pilgrims are going to move in 2 possible places. Either here on the Path of Wisdom, which is going to allow you to move your pilgrims across this path where you see the footsteps, or move up to one of these spaces to either get points or trigger one of these gates. Once the pilgrim has rested and scored the points or gained the benefit, they've stopped and they're done. You're going to have to use a new pilgrim next time you want to move. But these gates are positioned in such a way that if you're resting at a gate, your future pilgrims can always start from that location instead of starting from the beginning. Of course, these bonuses are going to increase in value as you move down the track. Now, there's one other place you can put these pilgrims, which is on your player board. So you might not want to place them all out on the pathway, but you're going to kind of have to make that decision. Now, that movement that you're spending can be spent to move any number of these pilgrims out on the board, or it can be spent to move your spirit. You're going to have a spirit on your player board, and it doesn't start with any kind of path, but you're going to be able to claim Bitoku cards, which is, of course, where the game gets its name. These are going to lay down in front of you and actually create the path for your spirit to move. Each one of these cards is going to lay kind of on top of each other so that you can create that path, and every stop along the way is going to give you some kind of bonus. And these are usually pretty good bonuses. You're going to be able to get a lot of resources, amulets, or even just points for moving down this path. At the end of the game, you're actually going to get more points for the more Botoku you have. So there's a bunch of different reasons that you might want to expand this path out.
Yeah, Ryan touched on it with the Bitoku cards there. All the different components in this game are going to give you a wide range of different things. And you can really kind of start to build engines for certain aspects of the game across different components. You might be able to move up kodamas with certain crystals or with spirits or with Bitoku cards, and that's going to give you a leg up on all of these kodama tracks. All of the different aspects of the game have a little bit of that. It's just scattered across the board in a number of different places. And speaking of other actions, the next section right here is where you're going to go to effectively collect resources. When you play a die here, you're going to take some number of resources according to this track, and again, take a building action if you can. And then the first, or I guess last one that we're talking about, is where you build buildings or take some of these crystals. When you place here, with a low value dice, you might build a building. Then you might build a building or take a crystal, and then ultimately, like Ryan said earlier, you could potentially build a building and take a crystal and potentially even get a little bit of a discount there. The buildings are going to be built on these spots right here and in this 5th spot as well. But the cost of those buildings is back to your player board. Across the bottom of your player board, you'll see 6 potential building markers. You're going to build these left to right and pay the costs below each building. Once you build a building, you're going to place it out on the board, pay its cost, and put your marker there. From that point forward, that building can be used when someone places a die above it, as long as the die has the value on the building. They're going to get the bonus, in this case, a level 2 amulet, but when they use this, you're also going to get either a point or a level 1 amulet.
Yeah, and these buildings are kind of split up based on their elements, and you'll see the elements printed on the board, which shows you where you can potentially place your buildings, which leads you into a pretty tricky situation. If you want to place a fire building, for example, and all the fire spots are already taken, you're just kind of out of luck. And there are more buildings than can be placed on the board at once. We learned that by going through and looking at them
the hard way.
Because, I mean, that's part of the game, right? You don't know which of the buildings are going to come up. You're not always guaranteed to see the same buildings every game.
Yeah, and the other thing, like I said, is to take a crystal. Now, we talked about this earlier. When you take a crystal, you're going to be able to take from this face-up display here, potentially paying a cost if you want one closer to the stack. When you take one, you're going to place it on your player board in one of a few different areas. If it's a pink crystal, it's going to go in the yokai spots. If it's purple or sort of a yellow-orange, it's going to go in one of these spots across the top of your board, which is for that income.
And I like that because they're doing 3 different things. You're either getting a benefit when you activate your die, you're getting a benefit when you have income, or you're getting an ongoing benefit that gives you potentially additional points for taking certain actions. You only have a certain number of slots for crystals, though, so you need to be picky when you're taking them. Now, you can potentially not even go down that route and not even use crystals, but if you do, you can potentially score a lot of points.
No, and we've already covered a lot, and we'll cover a little bit more, but it is important to point out, this is the game where you're not going to be able to do all those things and do a lot more. We'll definitely get more into that with our first impressions, though. And the last space is this space here that has these 4 spots that Ryan talked about earlier, but those comprise the effectively 5 areas where you can place your die.
Yeah, and you're generally going to get to place all 3 of your dice out here if you want. However, like we talked about, you could potentially block someone. If both of these spaces are filled, you can't place a dice there until they move their die across the river. Now, this is where the game, I think, gets a little more interesting, because every time you move your die across, you have to kind of humble yourself in front of the spirits. You actually have to decrease the value of your die by 1, which means a 1 pip die can never cross the river, which is difficult because you'll need to use your amulets to pump that up to something that lets you at least move across.
And remember, you have to use those amulets when you place your die.
Right.
So you're not likely ever going to want to place a 1 because it is a very weak power and you're not going to move across the river.
But once you are across the river, each one of these 4 spots effectively does the same thing. You're either going to get to choose a new yokai card to immediately bring into your hand. That's the hand management we were talking about. Or you're going to get to choose the Bitoku card that immediately is going to come and be added to that pathway. Or you can choose just a bonus action that's either going to let you draw new spirits, move your Kodama, or potentially collect these rocks. And these rocks are victory points, but they're each going to score in-game victory points in a different way. One of the most reliable ways to take that is to just come across the river. Every time you take one of these rocks, it's going to go on your player board. But remember earlier where I said there's another spot for pilgrims? Pilgrims actually have to go worship at those rocks for them to even be worth points. So it's kind of a multi-step process here. You can place your pilgrims next to the rock. Whatever is printed on that rock, you're going to get points for that element of the game for each pilgrim that's next to them.
Right.
So that requires some serious planning. You need to look out at these rocks early maybe and think about what you want to do or if you want to build towards a specific end goal. And then also hope that somebody else doesn't take that rock because these will not replenish at all. What you see out there is what you get for the whole game.
Now, it is important to note that you get any 2 of those things on that last bonus action, so it's not really just a throwaway action because there are some juicy things to do there, like acquiring those stones or rocks, and you can do 2 different of any of those actions. One other thing I wanted to point out here, just to give you a sense of what happens in the layered approach to dice placement. If Ryan had moved across here and I'd placed here earlier but after he'd moved one, and I find myself like this, guess what? I am not going to be able to cross the river because I have to move from here to here. And he's blocked up those spaces. So of the 9 total actions I could possibly take, he's taken away 1 now, and I have 8. And often you're going to find yourself with probably even 7, and maybe even a higher player count. It could get a little worse.
Yeah, hopefully you can see what we mean when we talk about that, why you're going to get a different number of actions every time. Well, first of all, coming up here just forfeits 1 action.
Yes.
And then getting blocked forfeits 1 action. Coming down here with a 1 forfeits an action because you know you're not going to be able to cross the river. But theoretically, this is going to go around, and if you have no actions to take, you just pass or out, and then players are going to finish their actions until everyone's done. Now, the game is only 4 rounds, so it might seem like you're taking a lot of actions each round, but you're only doing this 4 times.
Yeah, there's just 4 rounds, and each round has 4 phases in it. At the end of the game, you're going to be scoring for a ton of different things. Now, before we get to the final scoring, though, there are going to be a lot of points you score throughout the game as well. I think in our first play, we were down at least in the sort of maybe 20-30 range before we did final scoring.
Yeah, and I like that those points are colored differently, so you always know gold points are points that you're scoring immediately, and purple points are points that you're scoring at the end of the game, so you kind of know when you're supposed to score them.
Yeah, so final scoring, it takes you through this 8-step process, the first of which is to produce 1 more time because you might get some resources that'll give you maybe a point or half a point at the end of the game. But the first thing you're going to be doing is very simple. You're just going to look up at the player order, and whoever grabbed first player at the end of the game is going to get 3 points.
Yeah, then you're going to score for your Bitoku cards. Remember I said you're going to get points for having more of these. It's basically set collection, but you'll notice that some of the Bitoku have the same symbols. So you're only collecting a set of unique ones. So in this case, I managed to snag 2 Bitoku, which is worth the number of points. If you can manage to get a full set of 7, you're going to get a lot of points.
Yeah, 22 points. So that's pretty significant, but you have to go pretty heavy on that Botoku strategy. The next thing you're going to be doing is scoring these Kodama tracks. So you're going to look at all the tracks, and first player is going to get some points, second player is going to get fewer, and in some cases, third player is going to get some, in some cases, they won't.
The next thing you're going to score is those rocks I talked about, and each one of these rocks is going to score based on the number of pilgrims that surround them. Some of these rocks can only have 3, some of them can only have 2. But you're going to look at what's printed, and sometimes it's going to have 2 things printed. You're going to score up to 3 points for each one of those items. This could be another way that you could get a lot of points, but you're probably not going to get both the Bitoku and the stones because you really have to focus on one or the other.
And the next thing is kind of interesting, and it's not the very last thing like it is in most games. This is where you're going to look at your resources, but you're also going to look at the pip values on your dice, so you're going to take all those values of your dice plus all the resources of certain types that you have, add that all up and divide by 4 and get those points as well.
The next thing you're going to do is score those vision cards David talked about. Now, what's interesting about these cards is they can actually score you negative points if you didn't complete them. Otherwise, they're going to score you some amount of points. Each one of these cards wants a variety of different things, but you have to assign these items to a specific vision card. That means if I have 2 vision cards that want the same thing, I better have it twice or else I can't score both those cards. Some games will just let you score the vision card as long as you have it, but it helps to actually take those items and place them on the card so you know that you've already used them.
And then finally, the last thing you're going to do is look at your player board and get all of the purple points that you've uncovered. And these can be in a number of different places. Every pilgrim that you've woken up is going to effectively give you 2 points. And then any building you've built is going to give you escalating points all the way to the end. This, too, can be a massive source of points at the end of the game.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a fairly high-scoring game. You're getting points from a lot of different places. In fact, almost everything you're doing in this game is giving you points in some way or another, either immediate points or in-game points. I would truly consider this to be a point salad game.
Absolutely a point salad game, but we will talk more about that in our first impressions of the game because we just wanted to do this one to give you a sense of the flow of the game and hopefully maybe just short of a full how to play, the detailed aspects of what's going on in the game and the actions that you're going to be taking.
Yeah, hopefully by now you have a pretty good idea if this game is for you or not, or if you're interested in the things that are happening. But yeah, please definitely follow us over to watch the next video. But otherwise, leave some comments below. Let us know what you're most excited about when it comes to this game. And until we see you again, keep having fun at the table.
Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.